I returned to the hospital to clear my name, only to find myself framed for an organized scheme and facing dozens of years in prison. With the internal security team closing in, I had minutes to expose the truth or become the victim of a heavy charge that would destroy my life forever. I shouldn't have come back. That was the first thought that flashed through my mind the moment the heavy, pressurized glass doors of the hospital wing hissed shut behind me. The air inside always smelled the same, a cloying mixture of high-grade antiseptic, floor wax, and that faint, metallic tang that you only find in places where life and death are constantly bartering for time. I hadn't been back in 3 weeks, not since the board of directors handed me my administrative leave papers with hands that trembled from more than just old age. They told me to stay away. They told me it was for my own safety while the internal investigation was ongoing. But when you've spent 15 years of your life in these halls, a leave of absence feels like an amputation. I just wanted my journals. I needed the records I'd kept in my private locker. The ones that proved the discrepancies in the pharmacy logs weren't just clerical errors, but a deliberate, organized scheme. I kept my head down, my hoodie pulled low, moving with the practiced rhythm of someone who knew exactly which floor tiles squeaked and which security cameras had blind spots. I was halfway to the surgical staff locker rooms when I saw her, Elena. She was standing by the central nursing station, clutching a clipboard so hard her knuckles were white. Elena had been the head nurse on my floor for a decade. We had survived 36-hour shifts together. We had saved lives that the textbooks said were already lost. She was the most stoic person I knew, a woman who could stare down a coding patient and a panicked family without blinking. But when her eyes met mine, she didn't offer a smile of relief. She didn't even look surprised. She looked absolutely gut-wrenchingly terrified. Before I could even raise a hand to wave, she was moving. She crossed the corridor in a blur of blue scrubs, her eyes darting frantically to the elevators and then back to the security desk at the end of the hall. Before I could utter a word, she reached out and grabbed my sleeve. Her fingers dug into my arm with a strength that made me wince, her nails catching on the fabric of my jacket. "Mark, what are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a ragged whisper that barely carried over the hum of the ventilation system. "You have to leave. Right now. You have to turn around and walk out those doors, and you don't stop until you're across the state line." "Elena, wait. I just came from my notes," I stammered, confused by the sheer desperation in her gaze. "I can prove what's happening. The inventory, the missing vials. It's an organized scheme, and I have the names." She didn't let go. If anything, her grip tightened, pulling me toward a darkened alcove near the service elevator. "Names don't matter anymore, Mark. They've moved past the paperwork. They found it. They went into your locker an hour ago with the internal security team. They found the packages with the substance mark, dozens of them, hidden right behind your textbooks." My heart dropped into my stomach. "What? No, that's impossible. It doesn't matter what you don't have," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "They've already called it in. They aren't just looking to fire you anymore. They're framing this as a criminal operation. They are preparing a serious charge against you, the kind that breaks a person's life forever. They're calling it an attempt to destroy lives with a criminal enterprise. They're going to say you were the supplier, the mastermind." The hallway suddenly felt much narrower. The flickering fluorescent lights above seemed to pulse in time with the pounding in my ears. I looked toward the exit, but through the glass I saw a black SUV pull up to the curb. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, the kind of men who don't work for hospital security. They were internal security, the heavy hitters who only showed up when someone was being erased. "They're here," I breathed, the reality of the trap closing in on me. Elena looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, and then she looked at the service elevator behind us. The light above the door dinged. It was descending. Someone was coming down from the director's office. She didn't hesitate. She shoved me toward the heavy steel door of the stairwell, her face a mask of pure panic. "Go," she whispered. "If they catch you with those packages already found in your locker, you're looking at dozens of years. They'll make sure you never see the sun again." I turned to run, my boots heavy on the concrete steps, but as I reached the first landing, I heard the stairwell door above me slam open. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps began to echo down the shaft. I was trapped between floors, and as I looked through the small wired glass window of the door to the second floor, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't just security. Standing there, calmly checking a handgun tucked into his waistband, was the chief of medicine, the man I had trusted more than my own father. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine through the glass, and he didn't look like a doctor anymore. He looked like a hunter. He reached for the door handle, and as the latch clicked open, he whispered a single word that I could hear even through the heavy wood. "Found you." I didn't wait to see if he would pull the trigger. The moment the latch clicked, I threw my weight against the stairwell door, not to keep it shut, but to use the momentum to propel myself backward into the concrete void of the landing. I didn't head up. There was nowhere to go but the roof, and that was a dead end with a 60-foot drop. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my boots echoing like hammer strikes against the stone. Behind me, the door groaned open, and the heavy, measured rhythm of Dr. Aris's footsteps followed. He wasn't running. He didn't have to. He knew the layout of this building better than anyone, and he knew that every exit was likely already covered by his security team. My breath was coming in ragged, searing gasps, the smell of dust and old concrete filling my lungs. I hit the basement level, the air suddenly dropping 10 degrees and smelling of damp earth and industrial coolant. This was the bowels of the hospital, the place where the power, the water, and the secrets were kept. I burst through the basement door into a labyrinth of steam pipes and humming electrical transformers. The light here was dim, a sickly orange glow from the emergency lanterns. I ducked behind a row of massive industrial boilers, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. I needed a moment, just 1 second to think. They had planted the packages. If Elena was right and they had found dozens of vials of restricted substances in my locker, I wasn't just facing a firing or a lawsuit. They were building a case for a serious charge, the kind of heavy accusation that the system doesn't let you walk away from. In their narrative, I wasn't a doctor anymore. I was a key player in an organized scheme, a man using his credentials to distribute poison. If I was caught now, with the chief of medicine himself as the primary witness to my flight, I'd be looking at decades of imprisonment. They would make sure I never saw a hospital or the sun ever again. "Mark!" Aris's voice boomed through the basement, amplified by the metallic resonance of the pipes. It was calm, almost fatherly, which made it 1,000 times more terrifying. "You're only making this worse. We found the evidence. We know about the network you've been running. If you come out now, I can talk to the internal security team. I can tell them you were under extreme stress. We can handle this quietly." Quietly. That was the word they used when they wanted someone to disappear without a ripple. I gripped a rusted pipe, the cold metal biting into my palm. I knew where he was heading. He was moving toward the restricted storage unit at the far end of the hall, the place where the hospital's high-cost medications were kept. It was also where the discrepancies I'd found had originated. I began to crawl through the shadows, moving toward the maintenance office. There was a secondary server rack there, an old system they used for the backup cameras. If I could get to it, maybe I could pull the footage from an hour ago, the footage of whoever had actually put those packages in my locker. I reached the office door, the handle turning with a soft, agonizing squeal. The room was tiny, filled with the smell of ozone and burnt coffee. I scrambled to the terminal, my fingers flying over the keys. My hands were shaking so violently I had to keep hitting backspace. Come on, I pleaded silently. The login screen flickered. I bypassed the admin lock using a code I'd memorized months ago during a system upgrade. The screen jumped to life. A grid of 16 grainy, grayscale views of the hospital's restricted areas. I scrolled back to the locker room feed from 45 minutes ago. My breath hitched. I saw a figure in a white lab coat walking toward my locker. They had a master key. They opened it and began stuffing small, dark packages behind my books. I leaned in, squinting at the screen, trying to make out the face. The figure turned slightly, looking directly into the camera as if they knew exactly where it was. It wasn't Dr. Eris. It wasn't one of the security thugs. It was Elena. She looked calm, her movements methodical and practiced. She wasn't the panicked friend who had grabbed my sleeve in the corridor. She was the one who had set the trap. And then I saw her do something else. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a radio, and spoke into it. Suddenly, the audio from the recording kicked in, a low bitrate crackle that filled the small office. "The bait is in place," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "He's on his way to the basement now. I told him exactly what he needed to hear to run straight into the trap." A cold realization washed over me. The warning in the corridor wasn't an act of mercy. It was a hurting tactic. She had driven me down here, away from the public eye, where there were no witnesses and no escape. Just then, a heavy click sounded from the door behind me. I spun around, my back hitting the server rack. The door didn't open. Instead, I heard the sound of a heavy steel bolt sliding into place from the outside. I was locked in. I looked back at the monitor. The feed changed. It wasn't the locker room anymore. It was the view from the camera directly above the office door I was standing behind. I saw Dr. Eris standing there, but he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, holding a small remote device and a weapon that looked far too professional for a hospital, was Elena. She looked at the camera and smiled, a cold, jagged expression that made my soul shiver. "Mark," she said, her voice coming through the office's intercom system, "you were always too curious for your own good. You should have just taken the money like everyone else." She reached out and pressed a button on the wall. A low hissing sound began to fill the room, coming from the ventilation duct above my head. I looked up and saw a pale, translucent vapor beginning to pour into the small space. "Don't worry," she whispered. "We've already prepared the report. You didn't go quietly. You were armed, you were erratic, and you couldn't live with the guilt of what you'd done. By tomorrow morning, you'll be the face of the biggest scandal this city has ever seen, and you won't be around to tell your side of the story." My vision began to blur. The room started to spin, the orange emergency lights stretching into long, fiery ribbons. I lunged for the door, pounding my fists against the steel, but my strength was fading fast. As I slumped to the floor, my eyes fixed on the monitor. Elena was holding up a piece of paper to the camera. It was my journal, the one I had come back for. She pulled out a lighter and held the flame to the edge of the page. "One last thing, Mark," she said, her voice fading as my consciousness began to slip. "The packages weren't just for you. We've already sent a set to your sister's house. If you don't do exactly what we say in the next 5 minutes, she's the one who's going to take the fall for the organized scheme." The world was beginning to tilt, the edges of my vision fraying into a dull, static gray. My lungs felt like they were being filled with hot lead, each breath a jagged struggle against the sedative gas pouring from the vents. But as my knees hit the floor, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic, the manual override for the server room's localized fire suppression system. I didn't have the strength to stand, but I had the weight of my own body. I lunged forward, slamming my shoulder into the red lever. With a deafening hiss, a cloud of white pressurized CO2 erupted from the ceiling nozzles. It wasn't oxygen, but it was a different gas, one that momentarily displaced the sedative vapor and dropped the temperature in the room by 40 degrees. The shock of the cold snapped my mind back into focus. I dragged my shirt over my face, filtering what little air remained, and scrambled back to the terminal. Elena and Eris thought they had isolated me. They thought this was a private execution. But they had forgotten one thing. This wasn't just a maintenance office. It was the hub for the hospital's patient education network, the system that broadcasted health seminars and announcements to every single screen in the building, from the plush waiting rooms to the monitors in the surgical suites. My fingers flew across the keyboard, blurring through the prompts. I didn't just upload the footage of Elena planting the packages. I set it on a recursive loop and patched in the live audio from the intercom. I hit the emergency broadcast command, a red-level override that would prevent anyone from turning the screens off without a physical disconnect. "The packages weren't just for you," Elena's voice echoed through the office speakers, crisp and clear. "We've already sent a set to your sister's house." The audio boomed not just in the office, but through the entire hospital complex. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of her voice reflecting off the basement walls from the hallway outside. I had turned the entire facility into a witness. The heavy bolt on the door screeched as it was retracted. The door swung open, and Dr. Eris stepped in, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He was holding the illegal weapon, but his hand was shaking. Behind him, Elena stood frozen, her eyes fixed on a small tablet in her hand. She was watching herself on the screen, watching as her own voice betrayed the organized scheme to every doctor, patient, and visitor in the building. "Turn it off, Mark," Eris bellowed, leveling the weapon at my chest. "Turn it off, or I swear to God—" "It's too late," I rasped, the CO2-chilled air making my voice sound like grinding stones. "It's not just on the internal network anymore. I set a delayed burst to the state police's anonymous tip portal. They have the footage, they have your names, and they have the audio of you threatening a civilian." Elena's face went pale. "Eris, we have to go. Now." "We aren't going anywhere," a new voice boomed. From the shadows of the hallway behind them, 4 men in tactical gear appeared. These weren't the internal security thugs Aris had hired to do his dirty work. These men wore the insignias of the state's high-priority investigation unit. They had been in the building for hours, tipped off by the very discrepancies I had flagged weeks ago. They hadn't stepped in yet because they needed the smoking gun, and I had just given it to them on a silver platter, broadcasted in 4K resolution. Eris dropped the weapon, the metal clattering against the concrete floor. He knew the game was over. The organized scheme that had funneled millions through the pharmacy logs was collapsing in real time. Elena tried to bolt, but she was tackled before she could reach the service elevator. As they were being led away in restraints, Elena looked back at me. There was no more ice in her gaze, only a hollow, pathetic desperation. She knew that the heavy charge she had tried to pin on me was now her own reality. She was looking at dozens of years for her role in the operation. An hour later, I sat on the back of an ambulance, a real oxygen mask pressed to my face. A detective approached me, handing me my journal, the one Elena had tried to burn. Only the edges were charred. "Your sister is safe," he said, his voice low. "We intercepted the couriers before they even reached her block. You did good, doctor. Most people would have just kept running." I looked up at the towering silhouette of the hospital. I had lost my career there, and for a few minutes I had almost lost my life. But as I watched the blue and red lights of the police cruisers fade into the dawn, I realized I hadn't just survived. I had finally lanced the infection that had been rotting the heart of the place I loved. I took a deep, clean breath of the morning air, the first one that didn't taste like chemicals or lies, and for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid.